So in our next lesson, Anthony, I want to talk a little bit about 1 Corinthians 15, and that refers to a little bit of the agency you talked about
Yes.
before of Jesus being God's representative. We see that it talks about everything being put under his feet. And what I really like the verse that he makes it very clear that this does not include God, the one
Yes.
who put everything under him. And then
Yes.
at the end, we see that Jesus hands the kingdom over to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could talk a little bit about that, maybe read
Yes.
1 Corinthians 15, 24 through 28. And
Yes.
that's
I would
just so
love to do
simple.
that. Yes. Can we go maybe just a couple of verses earlier to 20 of 1 Corinthians 15? Christ has been raised from the dead. Paul begins here because some of his church members were doubting the resurrection. Paul was appalled at that. So he says, Christ has been resurrected in verse 20. He's the first fruits, the first product, if you like, of those who are sleeping the sleep of death, as in Daniel 12, verse 2. For since by a man came death, that was Adam. Adam was the one who first caused death to enter into the world. By a man, note the parallel here, the man Jesus, also came the resurrection of the dead. Isn't that a wonderful parallel? Both are men. Jesus has been resurrected, Adam has not. For as in Adam all die, that's to say, if you're part of the Adam team, if imagine teams now, if you're part of the Adam group, and we all are as human beings, all are destined to die. I think you know that death is as certain as taxes, as they say. Absolutely, it's going to happen, unless, of course, Christ were to come back before you died physically. And we don't know the date of Christ's future coming. So you've got in 23 there, each in his own order. That's a military term, by the way. Each in his own battle order. And here's how it goes. Listen carefully to this. Christ, the first fruits. It's like a harvest. You harvest the wheat, the very first wheat to be harvested, and the very first man to be resurrected to immortality is Jesus. After that, that doesn't mean immediately after that. The Greek there is at a later stage. It's not immediately after. The first stage is Christ is resurrected. The next stage in the program, the Greek is very clear there, those who belong to Christ, that is, the true believers of all times, including Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets and all the true believers, wherever they are, they will be raised or resurrected at Jesus's parousia. I'm using the Greek word, the second coming. That word parousia means not presence exactly, but coming, arrival. Jesus is the arrival of a celebrated visitor when he comes back to the earth. He's going to raise the dead, having himself already been raised in the past, we know, around 30 AD. And in 25, Paul then says, he is destined to reign as king until he has put all his enemies under his feet. That's what he's going to do extensively during that 1,000-year period. We believe in the first stage of the kingdom being what's called the millennium. Jesus has been raised. He's not currently subjecting all the nations to him. If he were, we would not have the chaos that we've got on earth right now. But he's going to be reigning. He's destined to reign in that future kingdom when he comes back. He's going to be reigning with the saints, with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets. He's destined to reign in that future kingdom until he's conquered all his enemies. I remind you of the text in Luke 17 where Jesus said, at his coming, at his future coming, bring my enemies in front of me and kill them. That's not a popular verse, but that should be read. Jesus is not ultimately some weak person that's not going to overcome his enemies. He's going to be so angry with his enemies at his second coming. He says, call my enemies in front of me and slay them in my presence. That's in Luke 17. That's a verse to be looked at occasionally. It's not one you want to put on your refrigerator, perhaps. So then in verse 27 or 26, the last enemy that will be abolished is death. Can you imagine abolishing death? That's what Jesus working through God, from God, sorry, working as God's agent, he's empowered to do. He can actually abolish death. Wow, that's an amazingly brilliant idea. And in verse 28 here, when all things will have been subjected to him, then the Son, that's Jesus himself, will also be subjected to the one, that's the Father here, who subjected everything to him, Jesus, so that God, the one God, will back to the one God, may be all in all. That is a very fine summary of your Christian destiny and the destiny of the world. So I recommend those verses, 1 Corinthians 15, 20 to 28. This is most important and should be read and meditated on all the time. Okay.
Thank you, Anthony. And one thing I'd like to add, where you read in verse 26 that the last enemy to be eliminated is death. And then where it says at the end, the Son hands everything back over to the Father. And I think we see that in Revelation 21, 1 through 3, because after that white throne judgment, death is no more. Jesus has eliminated it. And that's when we see the new heaven, the new earth, and where it says that God will wipe away every tear from their eye. There'll be no more pain or death. And so now that death is done away with, we see, I think that's the idea of Jesus handing it back over to the Father. I think it just fits in so well there.
It does. And that's absolutely an inspiration. That's called Christian hope, by the way. And in Colossians 1, verse 4, I'll just mention this, that Paul said that hope is based on, it's because of, sorry, I'll get that right. Hope is the basis of love and faith. Let me get that straight. You have to have hope before you can have faith and love. That's Colossians 1:4. That strikes me as interesting. So if you're a little bit short of love and faith, you might want to strengthen yourself in the area of hope. Hope for the resurrection, hope for the kingdom of God on the earth.
And if we don't have that, we really don't have anything.
We really don't.
Well, that's what Jesus said here, or Paul said here in 1 Corinthians 15. You're pitied more than anybody if there's no resurrection.
Isn't that appalling that some in the church were saying, I don't think there's a resurrection? What? They were about to give up the faith, and Paul is so disappointed in them. I'll remind you that in 1 Corinthians 6:2, he says, don't you know, you slow people, I'm being polite, I won't be stronger than that. Don't you know that the saints are going to manage the world? Come on, folks. And then in verses 6 and 7, 9 and 10, I should say, in that same chapter, 1 Corinthians 6, in verses 9 and 10, he says, if you don't behave correctly, you won't, guess what, inherit the kingdom. I get it. Inheriting the kingdom means managing the world under Jesus. Take charge of 10 cities. It's not playing harps in the clouds in a so-called heaven. Forget the heaven language. The Bible never ever speaks about going to heaven when you die. It always speaks about inheriting the earth and the land and reigning, managing, supervising the world along with Jesus. What a marvelous opportunity. And I hope that in the audience listening to this, you realize you might want to do better than we're doing in politics today, because it's something of a disaster. That's another subject.